Hello, guys. Good evening. Come on in. Come on in. Tonight, we're going to talk about some funding things with respect to our local school districts with an expert by the name of Justice Graves. I'm so freaking glad you can come to us on a Sunday night in North Carolina. Welcome, Justice.
Welcome. Thank you, Sloan. I really appreciate you having me tonight for this important discussion.
Yeah, very much so. I've got a lot of parents that had been, hearing bits and pieces of, what federal funding is, what it is, what it isn't. It's interesting that you have done such a deep dive into this because you're not even from here, but we're so absolutely horrible in North Carolina that you felt compelled to do a very special presentation on us. Where are you from, by the way, Justice? Massachusetts?
Yes, so I'm from the state of Massachusetts. I'm a former school committee member, and I do stuff in local government. I've been focused on this stuff for about a year or so now, and I took it upon myself, as you said, to look at North Carolina, but I've also gone through several other states, how they're doing with the funding that we're going to talk about tonight. And I can sort of give a frame of reference from what is the norm in some of these plans, from what is exceptional about North Carolina or what isn't exceptional about it, because there's a lot of overlap that we're going to have to discuss on this.
Okay, we're going to discuss away, but Justice, I was telling you something in the green room before we came on, something that's absolutely hilarious. So, guys, if you're listening, do not leave because we're going to talk about. I'm going to tease a very major story for you that's coming out tomorrow. You're not going to want to miss, and Justice and I are going to break that down. So, the unfortunate tale of ARPA. What does ARPA mean? Can you tell us about that first?
So ARPA is commonly, in colloquial terms, we're talking about it as ARPA. ARPA is the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. It was passed last March. It was signed under the Biden administration. But there's a lot of other federal funding that sort of precedes it that leads us to this point today, really. I don't know how far I see you're on my slide with how we sort of gotten into this. If you want me to just kind of go ahead and sort of overview.
Yeah, please do, because we've got,
Okay.
we've been talking, so Justice, we've been talking about social emotional learning connected at the highest levels, and that's with ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds. And so basically the high level means we're supposed to have local control. Let me back this out for a second. Let me give him a little what's up. So when we talk about funding, you guys, we talk about the federal funding used to be about 10% of a school district's total funding. So let's say you're in Wake County, North Carolina, just an example. So Wake County, North Carolina, throwing it out there, you get about 10% of your funding from the feds. You get about 40 from the state, and the rest comes from your county taxes, right? Your property taxes, et cetera. So with 10% of the funding, why in the hell is there? It seems like there's like 90% of the control from the feds, right? And so we're going to kind of discuss that. We believe, look, it is unconstitutional, flat out, period, in a discussion for the feds to control the schools at the local level. It is. That's why there's a lot of lying going on. It's also unconstitutional for the state to control the schools at the local level from the state down. That's why you're hearing lying from Superintendent Truitt. Well, that's what she does, really. But you're hearing that from Truitt. You're hearing that from Biden. Well, that's what he does, really. So you're hearing a lot of liars, right? But the liars are controlling the schools, and they're not telling you. You know what they're telling you, Justice? Go to school board meetings, people. Go. That's where all the control is. And I really do wish it were true. You're shaking your head in your agreement. Yeah, I really wish that were true.
Yes.
But yeah, tell me why you disagree with that as well.
Having been on a school committee, the biggest part about all of this is it's the level of funding that they're pouring in through these federal funds, and the fact that schools economically are built from the ground up based on property taxes, but for all those little supplemental things that they want to do to be competitive, they're reliant on the state, on state and federal funding. And in order to comply with that, there's always a set of standards. And those set of standards usually set the stage for all local communities to follow them, whether you like it or not. It's very difficult when the state says, you know, you have local control, but we're going to give you $10 million. That's not what they're going to give a local school district. But let's say that they do that $10 million if you do SEL, and the local school district's like, well, sure, we'll do it. It acts, while the school district can reject the funding. Who would? I mean, you're sitting there, you're in a budget crunch, you're in budget season, you're like, I can end this if I just say yes. And they just say yes. They're just like, give us the money, give it, and we'll go with whatever you say. And that has, for over the past 50 years with the Department of Ed, the federal Department of Ed had huge ramifications throughout all 50 states. And North Carolina is no exception.
Common Core. We were one of the first ones to get Common Core, now social emotional learning. And now, we'll talk about it later, but I'm seething from this, Justice. We've already talked about it. So let me go ahead and put this slide up. To kind of give an overview. You've given a nice overview, and normally I don't run the slides, but you're going to miss out. We're going to totally miss out if we do not do it this way. So we're going to do it this way. Okay.
Yes.
So
all right.
Lay it on.
So we'll kind of go through some of these early ones pretty quickly. A lot of the staging for how we've seen now SEL in the school districts predates COVID, but the staging that we've seen with the federal funding really begins at COVID, with the CARES and the CARES 2 funding, or the CRSSA funding, that was passed under President Trump. It gave wide latitude for a host of economic relief. That's important. It's not important with SEL, but it's important to keep in mind as we move forward that there's a lot of money baked into the school districts that is put on stilts by the federal government right now. They're used to it over 2 years of having this type of federal funding. So if you want to go to the next slide, what is important is that ARPA is the first bill, and we'll see it a little bit later on. It's one of the most massive spending bills besides the CARES Act that has ever been passed in the United States, in the history of the U.S. Congress. And what it does is it gives special monies similar to the CARES 1 and CARES 2 acts in the form of ESSER monies. You've been talking about ESSER 2, ESSER 3. There's many names for them, but ESSER is the most common name for them under all umbrellas. That this one explicitly says, and we'll look at the statute, you can use it for social emotional learning. ARPA is very explicit that you can use it for that. Because it's not just a COVID relief package. A lot of people think ARPA is sort of lumped in as like the CARES 3, but it's not. It's actually a special piece of legislation that allows them to use it for a larger latitude of topics. The infrastructure bill, and I want to bring this up for the economic issue later on, is important to keep in mind that that's currently stalled, and this plays into this whole discussion. And it's important to understand that all of these funds are called ESSER, but they're distributed under what's called the ESF, or the Education Stabilization Fund, just to get the lingo and the alphabet soup sort of out in the open. I know Deb Philman of The Reason We Learn has appropriately harped on the ESF many times, and she's actually the reason that I got the link for where that fund actually was located with all the numbers and how it's moving. So I do want to give a shout out for that.
We love Deb. Deb's one of us.
We do.
And by the way, you are so precise. You write here, and signed into law by, or actually, I'm going to say this in my Massachusetts. I used to live in Massachusetts. So we call it law. It was signed into law by President Joseph Biden Jr. You're very precise here, Justice.
I like to sort of have all my facts in a row on that. So let's kind of go into,
Brandon. You didn't say Brandon. I would have said Brandon. You didn't say Brandon. You were good.
You would have said Brandon. Yeah,
I would.
So many things to say about Brandon. So many things.
So many things. Okay.
So what is ARPA? If we go into the next slide, you'll see the public statute says that they can use it for and it's highlighted social and emotional needs. Social and emotional learning is typically how it's been interpreted, but it doesn't have to be for that. Um, Unfortunately, every single state that I've looked at has basically taken that as the go ahead and driving force to say, oh, this social emotional thing, oh, it's new, it's this new culture, you know thing in the culture, it's this new way of learning. Oh, sure, oh, it's researched, oh, it's supported by research, oh, sure, let's go for it, which me and you both know is totally a lie. It doesn't support, it's not supported at all
No.
by research, but
So
it's
Rorschach.
it's the hot thing.
Yeah, the Rorschach's also
Yeah.
supported by research, and that's yeah. So let me ask you this. So you know, so you're saying that a state can elect to say no, but I want to give some a little bit of backing to the states. You're right. Once people hear, oh wow, it's the coolest thing. You don't want to miss out. You want to be cutting edge. Everybody's doing it, mom. Right? That states go ahead and they go along with it until they know the truth.
Until they know the truth. And I want to highlight this section, that in the bill itself, you're correct. It's never been tested whether or not they can ban social emotional learning spending with ARPA, but because of the way that it's written, if they comply with the other allowances, there shouldn't be an issue with the federal government and the Treasury giving them the money. So the states are electing to allow them to spend it on SEL. Can they? It's like I said, there isn't a state in the union that said no, including the state of New Hampshire. None of them had said no to this. I haven't seen a single one say we're not going to do SEL. Every single one of them has said, yes, we're going to allow it for SEL purposes. This document on screen right now is just an overview of the major differences between ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3. This is actually provided by the federal government. Those highlights about new staff and avoiding layoffs are going to be important, but the difference on the third column with the ESSER 3 is that they can use it for social emotional needs, which is completely different from ESSER 2 and ESSER 1. Again, the federal government states it by statute that it's allowed, but notice that under that rule, they can use it for other stuff too, and it would comply. The states are electing to allow this. So just remember, it is your state boards of education and your state legislatures that are saying, give us the money, we'll do all of it. I haven't seen a single one reject a single section of it so far.
Wow, that's scary. That's scary. And again, this is all over the country right now. As we know, we've been paying attention. Anyone's been paying attention. Hell, I mean, my grandmother in Israel. My grandmother in Israel calls me. She says, "Oh, Sloan, I've been hearing about the school boards." She knows what's going on. Everybody knows, and they're railing against SEL. I mean, everyone knows that, right? So I can't believe this is so prevalent. Okay, this is the fun. And so you want me to stay here or move on?
We can move on, but move on to the state highlights, the next slide. But what I will sort of highlight is North Carolina's a little bit different. They're a little bit sneakier in terms of their ARPA plan. The other states is just flat out in the open. I mean, North Carolina's out in the open, but we're talking about, for Arizona's plan, for example, they had a full-on conversation in it about, we're going to use Castle and Panorama for the contractor for this, or we may not. We may use these under other vendors, but they list them by name, and it's like a conversation that they're having in the document about using them, which is, as we all know, based on the research that Education First Alliance has been exposing in terms of North Carolina public schools. Panorama is not an SEL contractor that should be patted on the back and said, high five, you're really supporting the kids. It's rather unbelievable. And if we're talking about the other states, the ones that I've looked at in terms of New Hampshire and Massachusetts, they don't celebrate it quite like that with their support of Panorama, but they link it in. North Carolina actually completely excludes Panorama. Why? I'm not totally sure. but it is different in that regard. It's the first one that I haven't seen Panorama publicly linked or listed in it so far. In terms of these highlights, what I want to point out is that when you see the state highlights, this is the way that the state brags about it. So on first review, when I first reviewed the ARPA plans, North Carolina brags about how they're going to do social emotional health and, needs assessments. Upon second review, which is the next slide of their press release sort of about this, I understood a little bit more about what I was looking at and sort of discovered that there were more hidden biases that the state was engaging in that are alarming when you sort of understand the lingo that's sort of playing on in the background. North Carolina's not doing anything special compared to any other state, but they are being more covert and they're being more, I would say, universal in their attempts to make all school districts comply and be the same. Which is, I think, what you're reporting on Panorama has sort of concluded, that it's prevalent in all of the public schools, and they're doing the same thing over and over and over again with almost no differences. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, there's a lot about Panorama. And first of all, what we don't like here is lying. And so our superintendent has lied and lied and lied and included state funding for Panorama surveys when saying that she wasn't.
Yes.
It's the surreptitious nature of it, right? It's the sneaking, it's the lying. Panorama, North Carolina was a testing grounds for Panorama back in 2012. Mm-hmm. So we know very well about Panorama, what it is, etc. And Panorama is a personality test. Now, personality tests are illegal when you get into the employment realm, because it would unfairly prejudice employers against, or would-be employees, right, against employers. But and the same isn't true for students. It wouldn't prejudice colleges from accepting them, or it would prejudice a lot of things. So we're, again, we're going to have to sue our way out of this, Justice. What we are seeing here is insane.
No, and it violates so many federal statutes. It's actually rather incredible. I mean, you just talked about how, these types of activities with these types of personality tests and surveys are illegal for equal opportunity employers. But for some reason, this is totally acceptable for children under the age of, under the age of 10, or any child up to the age of 18. I don't. How is what's fair for one fair for the other? Even just, it doesn't pass the sniff test at all.
Well, no, it doesn't. And actually, this stays on a child's longitudinal record all through pre-K into the workforce here in North Carolina and beyond. So it first connected to their school ID number. And then later, when the child, or when the child doesn't become a child, right, that goes into college, it is attached to their social security number in perpetuity. So you're taking the results of a psychological test, right? It's completely subjective. And you're having it stay with child all year. What's going on is insanity. And again, you're saying, and I understand that you almost can't blame a state at first, right, for taking the money. What you can blame is elected officials lying about it.
Yes. Right. You need to the elected officials have to be open and honest that they are doing SEL in the classroom, or that they are sending materials that are SEL related to the children, because they're funding it. I mean, every single state is saying we're funding it for SEL. To say that you're not, then did you lie on your federal application for these monies? I mean, that's a very good point to make out. Who is the liar? Is it the federal government? Is it you? And depending on who's lying depends on, who's in trouble for this. So it's honestly, it makes me speechless at times how much people are just trying to hide away from what they're actually spending the money on, when it's in black and white all over these contracts and in these states.
Well, I mean, look, people lie, right? But we're not going to let them lie here in North Carolina. I can tell you that's for damn sure.
No.
So let's move on. Okay. So
let's
we see what the plan highlights. Yep. Let me reduce it a little bit. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So these are just the additional highlights on second review of what they were bragging about. Have you ever heard of stakeholder groups?
Yes. And by the way, stakeholder, when you hear it, that is a term that will be used in the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum. Every time you hear stakeholder, ding, ding, that's what it means. Yes. But tell me more.
No, in terms of local school districts, stakeholder groups they sound nice, right? It sounds like a nice work. Oh, the people who are involved or the people who this affects are going to be involved in the decision-making process. But that is not what they're talking about. These are groups that are pre-selected by the state or the authority who is overviewing the project. And they're vetted groups. So, for example, let's say that there's a student group that's for SEL and a student group that's not for SEL, and they're vetting students to put on this group to review the ARPA funds. Well, and you'll actually see this later on. That's why I'm using this example. If the state wants SEL and they get to choose which of the two groups they can select in terms of students or which student they get to select, they're going to choose the SEL student, 10 times out of 10 who wants it every time. And you don't get a choice. It's not like it's a group of usually unelected officials who come up with these stakeholder groups, and a lot of elected officials will go with it. Your local school boards will go with it, or in terms of the state board of education, they'll just go with it anyway. They're not usually elected in some cases. Sometimes they are, but they'll just kind of go with it. And we're talking about, just to put it into real terms, we're talking about organizations like the teachers' unions getting a seat at the table to decide what your tax dollars are going to be used for. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Right. Well, in our case, the General Assembly in North Carolina has the ultimate control over schools. They have aborted. They have abandoned their duty completely, because when you practice the principles of limited government, you would never ever delegate your responsibility to an administrative department like the DPI. You would never do something like that. They have done it. They need to get control of this school system. And oh, by the way, appropriations. So the legislature here needs to appropriate all these funds they have.
Yes.
So let's talk about when we have midterms coming up. There is not one Republican that I'm aware of, except for Mark Robinson, who came in after this, who has said, what in the hell is going on? Not one. So think about that when you have coming to you for votes.
No, and you're correct. And actually, this is actually a unique feature of North Carolina. In Massachusetts, the state legislature has totally converted its power over to the State Board of Education. But in North Carolina, your legislature directly voted on the appropriate uses for the ARPA funds. And that's actually admitted later on in the document. They saw the plan. They are constantly being updated when spending changes need to happen at a gross scale, at a very large gross scale. And you would have to look at the individual votes that were cast on that, but they're passing in a red state. Nobody's objecting and saying, cut that line out. We don't want SEL being taught here. We don't want it being used for things that are going to affect us down the line. They're not demanding it, and they're not demanding amendments to that, which they have the power to do, as the North Carolina General Assembly does.
Well, so I want you to know that if you do not like social emotional learning, there's no way that you should. Every single Republican has kept their freaking traps closed. They kept it closed. When they ask for your vote, this is what you tell them. If you're thinking about running for office and you want to get rid of some of these people, you know what to do. You need to understand the way that this works, guys, because when Republicans say we want parental choice and parents don't like this, and they tell you to go to your school board, you need to look them in the eye and say, why didn't you do something to stop this? Next slide, right?
Yes. Stakeholder groups are the district and state favorites. We went over that. So we can go to the next slide. So this is sort of interesting. So in all the states that I've been looking at, the commissioners on education are always the signatories. And in your state, and I know there's a battle going on with a contract that Superintendent Truer either is going to sign, or she has the power to not sign it, or she has to because of the board saying she has to, and a whole I don't even know if that's been resolved yet. I just know that that's an ongoing
Just
feature that's
let
been
me weigh in on
happening.
that. Let me weigh in on that. I'm glad you brought that up. Superintendent Truitt, of course, when she got caught red-handed passing, she's the only Republican in the country passing critical race theory, and she did it to pass a program, $7 million to teach 3 and 4-year-old disabled preschoolers how to deconstruct whiteness. When she got caught red-handed by us, by the national media, she said, I'm not going to sign the contract. We came back to her last month and said, hey, what about the contract? Oh, it doesn't need to be signed until October. We know she's lying. She always lies. We're staying on her. We'll get to the bottom of it, Justice, because who in the hell would get a contract passed in front of the board for approval in January if it doesn't come due until October? It doesn't pass the laugh test. I just proved it. You're laughing.
Yeah, I'm laughing because honestly, I've been, in the room where it happens at least once or twice, and I with any contract, and it's just that's not how that works. You don't
I know.
like a month or two in advance, maybe 3 months, but October, really? That
So she's lying, right? She's lying again. She's lying. We know she's lying. We're going to get you proof soon that she's lying. And again, we have look. Don't think it's one party, but guys, we have a Republican who absolutely is gung ho about this, and we're going to talk about that after this too, because I'm going to tell you the latest. Oh, you got. I don't know if you can tell, Justin. I mean, you've seen me. I've never been on fire and this on edge ever during a show, right?
No, I know, and especially with what we talked about, and we'll get to what sort of you previewed later on to me, but
But even this, yeah,
your state is on fire. Your state is
no
just
one's no one's
it's blazing the trail for all the other ones. It's just
yes, 100%. We are the most far left state in the union with our public schools. Period, bar none. There is no one else. There is no other state. Believe me when I tell you, and you'll know by tomorrow morning too. There is no other state. We have a dumpster fire at the DPI and the state school board, and there are no legislators stepping up, kicking in the door, and saying, "Damn it, what the shit is going on here?" Anyway,
your leadership is just it's abysmal. I don't understand how these people are going to stay in office during the midterms. I don't see it.
Well, anyway, let's proceed.
Anyway, so one of the interesting things is that Catherine Truitt is not the signatory on here, and that the signature is redacted. And I'm sitting here as someone who's looked at a few of these and saying, how is that even possible? So if you kind of go down, I looked up, as long as their pockets are being padded. Yeah, they're not going to speak up. They are not going to speak up as long as there's money.
Yeah, there's right. Money talks. Right.
Well, money talks when it's a several $trillion aid package that gets signed by, that gets signed by President Biden. That's it. It's not going to, unfortunately. But I looked at this and going back to the slide now, and I said, okay, I've never seen this before. So what's going on with this? And if we kind of go to the next slide and maybe the next one, I, looked through it and I'm like, okay, then there's this Office of Learning Recovery. And I'm like, I've never seen another state have an Office of Learning Recovery and Acceleration. Usually there's just like a little special team that's working on the learning recovery issues. Okay, why is there a whole office for this? So I looked into it. And the signature on here, Latricia Townsend, she is one of the directors, apparently in your state. I don't know why it's like this. They have elected to not have the superintendent oversee federal funding. It's done with a bunch of bureaucrats that monitor what the federal regulations are and sign contracts and go about it in that way and ensure compliance with the federal government when they receive those funds. So not only do you have a state legislature that's not saying no to this, you have a superintendent that's then passed it off to a department that is primed for this. That is like, give us the money. Come on, roll it in. We'll do what you want. We'll come up with the programs for it. I mean, the level of bureaucracy in this is...
Yeah, it needs to stop. I mean, people are begging me. They're begging me to run for state superintendent. And I said, if I did, I'd literally fire everyone and just bring in 25 experts. And the people I could not fire, I would put them all on one floor. I would disconnect the internet. I would disconnect the phones and say, sit there and do nothing. I'm not kidding you.
No, I don't. Honestly, considering everything, I really don't. As a private citizen, I'll just tell you, I wouldn't blame you if you did that. I wouldn't blame any superintendent that gets elected to go in and say no. This is far enough. I understand that there's a lot of federal regulations, and you're gonna kind of need a lot of support staff to make sure of that, because it's pages and pages of just some of it's garbage and some of it's really important garbage. It's still garbage, but it's important garbage. And it's hard for one person to make that decision. The problem is that you got to be skilled enough to know when you can smell from a mile away, hey, you're not telling me the whole truth on this. Or, hey, there's
Yeah.
parts of this in your presentation that you're not highlighting enough. What is this? What are these little things? It's
Yeah. It's insane. Should I move to the next slide? Yeah. What you're telling me is blowing my freaking mind. Office
so
of
there's an
Learning
Office of
Recovery.
Learning Recovery
It's
and
ridiculous.
acceleration, the OLR. Um, first I've ever seen of it. First I've ever seen ever existing. And if you want to go to the next slide, this is just to sort of prove this is in the ARP-ESSER document, the state plan for how to use these funds, by the way. But if you go to the next slide,
Okay.
I kind of went through their website trying to understand what are these things. And just kind of poking around, because there's a lot in there. There is a lot about equity. I'm not going to lie with you. There's a lot of programs that connect back to equity plans. There's a lot of plans that connect back to, culturally responsive education, culturally responsive teaching. There's a lot of slides that connect back to that. If you go through that website, which I've linked, which I have the URL at the end of my slide deck on this, but one of the things that I really want to point out, because I think this explains a little bit more, and I talked to Deb about this. I said, have you ever heard of EverFi? And she said, no, I've never heard of them. Well, and you'll see it. You can kind of go, why is North Carolina such a mess? They're all a mess. It's just North Carolina is actually blazing the trail for everybody else. I've never
Absolutely.
seen a state go so covert on some of this stuff and bury it so much. I've never seen a state, though I can be proved to be wrong. There's 50 of them, and I have to go through more of them, that basically, the acronyms, everything that, the common acronyms, CRT, SEL, um, it's rather incredible. But anyway, EverFi is a vendor. I'll call them a vendor, but they are an organization that specializes in creating curriculum. And they get money from from the state of North Carolina. And for the money that they get, they distribute that curriculum out to every public school that wants it, or some of the private ones that's available for them too. I don't know how that sort of works in terms of that. Another thing I want to highlight, these ARPA funds, they don't just go to, if you think that your private schools are safe, there's a special part of the fund that they can get money for this with the same rules and regulations for SEL. So it's the same thing, mandated by the state, that they get this money for. But
Mark Robinson
EverFi
is
specializes.
on this.
Mark
Yeah,
Robinson.
he is on this.
I thought
Yeah, Mark Robinson, he's our lieutenant governor. Yeah.
No,
But
and here's the
yeah,
thing, and this is what I was talking about earlier, is this is difficult for any one person to grasp. I mean, I've seen what Mark Robinson's been doing, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson in your state has been doing with some of the task forces and some of the issues he's tried to bring into the forefront, and I commend him for that. But there's only so much that the lieutenant governor is allowed to know versus the state superintendent.
correct.
And it's one of these situations where, because of the way that your Department of Public Instruction's board is built, he can there's a lot he can try, there's a lot he can bring up. There's a lot of, bully pulpit stuff he can do in terms of the public sphere, but his hands are really tied on this. And you can sort of see it in the way that he's like trying to get the the state assembly to understand, you guys got to actually try and do something and monitor this. But we all know how that's been sort of turning out.
Right. Yeah, I know. Well, look, I mean, yeah. So yeah, what we've got, I mean, just a runaway bureaucracy. This is not limited government. This is out of control government.
No, and if you go to the next slide, it's North Carolina's impact. This is just an overview. Curriculum provided at no cost, unlimited student licenses, so the documents can just go out to any of the students, license free. It's not copyright infringement. It's not any of that with any of the documents or textbooks that are released. And they have a whole thing, and there's some culturally responsive teaching and education baked into it too, a whole sort of list.
Yes, that's critical race theory, guys. Yep.
Right. But if you go up to the slide right before that, they're doing stuff with CASEL. They're doing, they're doing different national standards. And these are, as of last summer, these are the participating schools that utilize this vendor. And that's how many students. And so when you see the uniformity of the lesson plans going on with SEL, this is part of where it comes from. It's not all of where it comes from. There's a couple of other vendors and stuff that they sort of work with at the state level, but this is part of it. So pay attention and keep in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're right on this. The issue here, JW, is that we've got if you pay attention to politics, we've got a superintendent who, her party says that they're against all this stuff. But she's doing it anyway. So, that can't, if you're a political person, how does that help you in the midterms when our border state is Virginia? And you saw what happened in Virginia.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. That was a big one.
So, yeah. And by the way, I've just heard it from, I'm answering people are texting me things to ask, and I don't know why they're not on here doing it, but someone just said, all this is Biden's fault. I don't know why you're blaming it on Catherine Truitt. It's all Biden's fault. What would you say to that?
I would say that it's not. Catherine Truitt is a big part of this because there is a local control measure in here. She could, say no to certain contracts and things. We know this very well. It's not a Biden problem, and I'm going to get into it a little bit later on. Remember, Congress had to pass this bill that says social emotional learning is allowed. House had to say yes. The Senate had to say yes. Somebody had to sign it. Somebody had to prep it. Not just that, but ARPA has been, ARPA isn't the first bill that's been used. You've talked and hinted at how ESSER 2 funds have been used for this stuff. ESSER 2 was not passed by Joe Biden. It was passed under the Trump administration.
Correct.
This is equal parts bad far left agenda pulling in, combined with just a lack of self-awareness and understanding of the issue at hand. Or blissful ignorance. Oh, I see it. Put rose-tinted glasses on. Oh, it's not there anymore. We're good to go. Hi, kiddos. It's gonna be fine. Just don't sue us when you're messed up in the future or when you can't get jobs in the future. Just hi, little kiddos. You're all fine. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. Nobody wants to admit that this is happening.
Yeah, this is insane. States have the control. And they have the control for a lot of this stuff. And don't let them tell you they don't. Who signs the who does the appropriation? Who approves the appropriations? It's your elected officials.
Yes.
So
all 50 states, it's like that.
I'm gonna chime in. So what you see here, guys, is SEL is more important than anything on here. So the number one priority, no matter what, is the SEL, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So North Carolina is one of only 7 states that do this for middle school students. This is about the story that I wrote where they're asking, I don't know, 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds. How often do you have sex? When did you start having sex? All this other horse shit that they don't deserve to know. The CDC has some of their questions on there. North Carolina came up with some of theirs. It is done and administered by the DPI, as we've already covered. Speaking of lying, the DPI wrote a parental permission slip, which omitted a good part of the stuff. It says we're going to ask your children. Glory, Lloyd. We're going to ask your children about issues around sex, around abstinence. If you call asking them how many times they've had sex, how many partners, and all of this other stuff, if you call that abstinence, they're lying. These are liars. You got to check every single thing. They're liars.
Oh, it leaves you speechless. It honestly leaves me speechless because it's just
crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
If it wasn't in black and white, I would honestly think that I need to be institutionalized. I mean, that's just this is how I feel.
Yeah. Yes, Suitor, we do have trolls in here. It's interesting. The trolls that we have, they're actually felons. And I'm not even kidding you. So felons who do bad things to children also, but felons that come in here and yes. So permission was not asked for the survey. And Daniel, I'm getting this time and time again. Permission was not asked before the survey was administered to my high school son. And I have to tell you, there is such thing as iatrogenic traumatization. And that means just on contact, seeing stuff, right, will traumatize you. And some of these things were so traumatizing that it would do that. And so for that reason, not telling parents about this is unforgivable.
No, I'm right there with you with some of the stuff that's been coming out of not just North Carolina, but all 50 states. And all 50 states do this. They have surveys for students that they put out, some of them more graphic than others, but they don't tell people. People, they just assume, oh, the parents are going to be totally okay with this. They don't understand that, whether or not people like to admit it or not, there is such a thing as age appropriateness. And by and large, what's happening is not age appropriate. I mean, it's.
Yeah, definitely not. So I want to get through this. So the student representative.
So yeah, this is what I was talking about earlier about the selection of stakeholder groups. So obviously the student that they selected on the Superintendent's Advisory Council said that SEL should be, included in curricula. And of course they would say that. And one of the things that they don't tell you here is that there's student reps on usually everything that goes on in public education, whether it be at the state board level or at the local level. What they don't tell you is that members of stakeholder groups can fill many positions at once. You can be a board member and a parent, and you fill both of those slots, and it cuts out anybody else. You can be a member on the State Board of Education as a student, the non-voting member, and you can be on the representation for how ARPA gets spent as a non-voting member, but you can be on both. I don't know which student they selected for this, but it's always interesting to see when they sort of merge and do 2-in-1s, because they do it quite frequently. And I actually saw it during my time on local school committee with a presentation where, one of the board members was also a parent, and they filled both categories, and it pushed out what would have been another parent slot for somebody to have input on the use of ARPA funds, no less.
This is insane, guys. Pay attention. So we know, okay, so these we've got a student on the inside of this group, and we're getting lots of information. Can't wait to break that too.
All right. Parents need to take time to read a fine print. It's hard to find all the fine print. I will be perfectly honest with you. It's obfuscated in such a way, and it's put in so many different places. I mean, these are public documents. You're entitled to have access to them. But if you don't ask the right place where it may be, you're not going to get it, or they're just going to keep throwing you in, circles and circles and circles, and you're never going to get to where you're looking for. So I understand what some of the parents in the chat are probably saying with regards to, it's up to the parent. If they send them, a child to a public school, it's up to them. Unfortunately, and I did say this already, the private schools are also getting funding from this. So what schools, if every school takes funding and does SEL, do you just, and the parent doesn't have the means to homeschool, do they part up a new charter school where they're just going to accept the funding there? Are they going to make a new private school and accept the funding there? Anything that's in charter, private, public, they're getting ARPA funds some way or another for something.
Yeah.
And so it's important to keep in mind, you can read the fine print as much as you want, unless you're homeschooling. And I know not everyone can do that. How are you? You can't stop it. It's there. It's one of the most insidious parts about this is there were rural communities that had no exposure to this at all across all 50 states, and North Carolina included, rural school districts that were not exposed to this. And as if overnight, because ARPA was passed and because of all the money on it, they've been thrown into this, and they have to spend money on this, not knowing what it really is, not having, they're behind the 8 ball. This isn't like people who are in the city who have been, it's the most progressive and, the most hip thing to do, and it's been going on forever. This is virtually touched with this large pot of money that's been distributed. Every corner of the United States, from Alaska to Florida. And I think people really need, if your state is saying that they aren't doing this, 100% they are lying to you.
Check the state. Yeah, I always tell people, look, this is a state level issue. Check at the state. You have to check at the state. So I want to go over a couple more of these things. Hold on 1 second. Yes, because we're running out of time. Okay, we're almost done.
Right.
We're almost done. And this is important.
We're almost done that. This is important, and then I'll kind of go on. One of the other things that's going to become really important is so some of the school board meetings have been very heated across the country, and one of the things that the school boards keep threatening is you disagree with us, we'll go after you, and we'll contact DCF, and we'll do all these things to you. The states hired dozens and dozens of social workers for the sole purpose of going into school districts for a lot of reasons, some of them quite important, but they literally use this money to amass real tangible threats towards parents that they could actually send in the DCF, and they'd be able to take that level of case or that caseload.
This is incredible, you guys. This is we've been reporting on this too. This is government strengths going in to assess your child for mental health disabilities. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's nothing more than what you've already covered. Essentially, what's happened in every state is that because of students having dropped off the radar, kids having gone missing because they went virtual and they weren't required to come in for attendance for almost a whole school year, they're missing. So they have social workers that are working on finding those children. Same time, when they're not busy finding those children, they're doing other stuff. And it's not just social workers that they pay, that they're, using this money on. They're using it for school nurses, school psychologists, school counselors. They're using this money for teachers.
Oh, teachers. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Doing what?
No, that's fine. No, they're putting this money on teachers. And this is why I brought up the infrastructure bill earlier. In my local district, there was a preliminary presentation on this. All of the rural school districts that I've looked at across the states, because of the economic problems that happened because of COVID, they are putting unhealthy amounts of their teaching staff's full salaries onto these grants, which is allowed, but these monies expire next year, not 2022, but 2023. They got to finish it up by then. And the reason why that big infrastructure package that Biden wants to pass is so important is because here's the deal. They have gotten people addicted to the drug of federal money with CARES 1 and CARES 2 to put more teachers and staff on it. All of education in America right now is standing on stilts. I said this at the beginning of this discussion. If they don't pass anything, all of the jobs that were created in the public sector in education, they're going to go away. Especially in the rural communities where people moved out to get away from the cities during, the pandemic.
There's already a teacher shortage.
There's already a teacher shortage as it is. They had to lower standards in almost all of the states to get more teachers in because they didn't have the certifications and the credentials for it to be teachers at the state. So now all these teachers are on this huge chunk of money and it's going to collapse. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Either your property taxes are going to have to go up 10, 15% next year, or schools have to cut positions. There's not really any, you can look at it every single way. And as a private citizen, I'll tell you, there's no other way to interpret this as it will be an economic sort of recession in the public education sector because of that. It will cause a collapse that we haven't seen in quite a while.
Let me ask you this. Then why in the hell is Catherine Truitt at DPI giving her employees exorbitant raises?
She can't afford it, but she's going to keep doing it. It's because they're going to have to approach the state legislature to raise other taxes or to impose other taxes to get that funding. That's what's going to have to happen.
So she's raising our taxes, not even to pay teachers who are actually on the front line doing something.
Yep.
Wow, this is weird. Huh. That's interesting. I had no idea. Okay, so wow. So schools are on shifting sands right now.
Yes.
Okay.
There's no other way to put it.
Okay, well, good, because they need to crash and burn in terms of the administrative state. I mean, they're hiring school psychologists like there's no tomorrow, and it's temporary.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
they're all on temporary grants. This is a temporary grant that we're talking about here. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Yeah,
padding the pockets of desk sitters. I would totally agree with that, right? Padding the pockets of desk sitters. And so I can see where you're saying that. Yeah, I definitely agree. Hold on, I lost you for 1 second. Okay, so I'm gonna get up a story here that we're going to release tomorrow. It is something that we're talking in the green room about, and it does have to do with federal control, because we talked an awful lot about that now in parental rights, right?
Yes.
Look, let's say that all of the parents, or most of the parents in Wake County, did not want social emotional learning. What we've talked about tonight, it shows that their voice doesn't count, their vote doesn't count, their tax money doesn't count. They don't count. They don't count because there's nothing that they can do, because the state has taken money and the district has taken money, and there's nothing they can do. So here's another example. And I've gotten feedback about this already. So I'm going to show you this. This is going to drop tomorrow. And so here's what you're looking at. North Carolina schools allow children to change their name and sex without parental consent. Let me explain to you what that means. Okay. What that means is this, is that what happened this week is this. All teachers from Orange, teachers from Wake County, and teachers from Mecklenburg County reached out. It wasn't just teachers. It was teachers, it was a principal, and it was 2 school board members reached out to Education First Alliance and said, hey, dude, there's no sex on the in fact, let me show you this first. There's no sex in Power School. In other words, Power School is the state's computer for managing data. You take roll there, you have the address, you have all these things that you would need for a student. they said, hey, the gender is missing. So let me show you the before. What you're looking at, and let me make it a little bit bigger, is it's redacted. We had to redact it, right? It's
Right.
before. So you would understand that, hey, you know, you see here male, female, male, female, male, female. Okay, got it? And you need to see
Mhm.
that, right? I mean, people need to balance classes out. You don't want all boys in one class, right? You don't want all girls in one class. Okay, that's before. Let me show you the after. Here's the after. There is no sex on here. The DPI, Department of Public Instruction, Catherine Truitt, completely wiped out the sex without telling, without notifying principals, the data managers there at the school system, or teachers. And there is a mad scramble to determine what the hell is going on.
And you had broken that news to me right before we went live today, and the first thing that I asked you was, it are there ethnicities and race still on there? And I, just shown publicly, yes, their race and ethnicity is still included in the aggregate data. So here's the thing, and I've seen the Civil Rights Act a few times. I don't know what part of federal law that they're invoking for this.
Oh, I can
but
tell you.
if they're not doing it, here's the thing. If they are not going to include sex, then they shouldn't include ethnicity. But if they're going to include ethnicity, then they have the ability to put sex in. They're not different things in terms of what the they're different things in terms of what the Civil Rights Act says, but they're all on the same classification of these are individual characteristics that
Right.
do not change and that are, we usually call them protected, but all characteristics of a person are protected in federal law. But those are the most common ones that are discriminated against. So it doesn't, to me, it's insane that they're going to remove sex, but keep race on there for no other
Well,
reason than to do it. I don't.
here's the explanation I've just received while we've been on this is that there is some sort of, and I remember the law, it was, or the case, it was in the Fourth Circuit in 2020, and it was saying that gender identities are protected class. So some lawyer just told me so some lawyer just told me that, hey, the DPI's lawyers probably looked at that and said, you know what, to prevent a lawsuit, we're just going to take the genders off of there.
I remember that case. I don't know which statute it expanded, but it's the same statute that has race and sex in it. So race, sex, other characteristics that are listed in it, and it expanded it to say sex also means sexual identity. But right next to it on the list of characteristics is race. So that doesn't pass the legal test. If it's listed with race as one of the protected characteristics, but race is still allowed, why not the other one? What is the difference here? What is the legal difference? Because they're listed in the same statute for the same purpose, for the same reason. And I think it's the Civil Rights Act that it expanded certain sections of the Civil Rights Act. That case expanded.
Yeah. Well, what that allowed for is boys to go in the girls' bathroom. What that allowed for, so that's what you saw.
Right. That debate, those things that have been happening in terms of, right.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate. I'm going to say, okay, but Justice, it's not possible to misrace a kid, but you can misgender them. So
Are
then
you kidding me? What do you? Are you kidding me? I mean, I know a lot of people whose race is different from their outward appearance. They come from families who, and they are related to people who are Black, who are Hispanic, but they don't look like it, but they come from those families. You look at their parents and you're like, are you an adopted child? No. Oh,
I know plenty.
I mean, this is America. I mean, anyone can look like anything. I mean, yeah, some of it's not even mixed race. I mean, it's incredible sometimes with how many people we have in America, how many different ways people, different facial features, different ways of, different appearances that just naturally occur. Yes, you can totally miss, right? And if we go down to ethnicity, I mean, all the time from the people that I know, I've seen people, mislabel a Dominican with a Haitian, goes horribly wrong. Opposite way, they do it with, they say that a Haitian's a Dominican, doesn't go well. They
Right.
don't like it when you do
Or
that.
Vietnamese
That's a
and,
huge cultural
Chinese.
thing. Oh yeah,
And it's difficult. Look,
or Japanese and Chinese, and it's just it's
right. And
bad.
so why do you think they took gender off? Because what it allows for, you want to talk about parental choice? North Carolina has just become the most inhospitable state in the union for parental choice. It just has become that, because guess what? In March, Catherine Truitt, again, was heralded as some great hero for saying that, hey, we're going to allow kids to choose their own names, right? So they could technically use a different name at school that's not their gender. Okay, fine. And then now this, so they can pick their name and they can pick their gender. But the scariest hell part is a teacher can pick their gender as well. Now this opens up a can of worms.
Oh yeah. Well, there's more stuff about with regards to parental rights in North Carolina, and that's highlighted in the state plan. Is they can send your kid to a pediatrician without you knowing about it, and they claim it's to save money. But if that child is outside of your health insurance network, they go to a pediatrician or somebody who does psychotherapy on them outside of the network. And there's a few parents where we've heard this from. I know that, I don't know if you've done reporting, but I've heard it through different channels. It doesn't save you money. You're getting billed for out-of-network costs. You're getting billed for being outside of the insurance network. You didn't save money because your kid, you didn't know about it. Your kid went off and now you have a $500 bill sitting on your lap, and they're getting drugs and you don't know what's going on, or they're getting help for things that you didn't know that were happening in the household.
Yes, parents,
and you
this
couldn't
is really
take
happening.
them, and you couldn't take them into your psychotherapist so that they could be evaluated by somebody that you decide on. They took it outside of your hands. You're getting excessively billed, and you can't control when it's happening. How is that safe for a child? For a parent to be billed when they don't know that it's happening, when they got to pay things like car insurance, health insurance, they got to pay things like their houses, they got to pay on their mortgages, they got to pay rent, they got to get food. What is the state thinking on this? They're not. Regardless of the issue of transgender rights.
Right.
It's
yeah. Look, I got to tell you, and I've said this a lot. Gay people don't like this. You know why? Since when is it not okay to be gay? Since when is it not okay to be gay anymore? You have to change your gender, and
it's fine. No one has an issue with it. I've never seen a person with an issue with it.
I've never seen an issue, anyone ever, with a child being gay. But this whole thing of transgender, it removes women and girls out of the equation, and it removes gay people out of the equation. That's what it actually does.
Yes.
So a teacher can be told to use they, them, sir, ma'am. Yeah, I mean, so what in the hell is going on? Because again, I heard from a lawyer that I know, and he's like, I'm just going to play devil's advocate, and I'm just going to say DPI's lawyers looked at it. By the way, they didn't tell any teachers or principals they're going to do it. They just did it, and that it's Biden's fault. I'm sorry. How is this Biden's fault?
It's not Biden's fault, because that's a state level decision. They can't make that kind of choice. I mean, listen, and I can see how people make this mistake. Congress got rid of gendered language. Okay, fine. What about the North Carolina Assembly? It's
not
up,
yet.
It's up to them. They're the lawmakers. Oh, your Department of Public Instruction? Well, they're up to it as well. So the federal government can't make the states do that. They can't. There's nothing in ARPA that says you gotta, use gender neutral language, or you gotta go and do this with gender language. No, it doesn't say that. There's nothing in federal statute that says that. They are lying to you if they are doing something and their first instinct is, what's the Biden administration? We can't do anything about it. Or talk to your local school board. We can't do anything about it.
Right.
It's 9 times out of 10, it's them. It's usually 9 times out of 10. It's that 10th one you got to be really careful about, but 9 times out of 10, and this is one of those things where it is a state level decision. It's not.
Yeah, it's a state level decision. Look, you're going to have, I'm telling you, what we're telling you is the truth. and you're going to have others on the same side as Catherine Truitt covering for this. It is a state level decision. This wasn't even voted on. This is completely erasing the gender.
And you know what? And that's how a lot of this stuff gets done. It's not voted on. A bureaucrat just waves a wand and says, ta-da, it's the new popular thing. Go hither. It's totally okay. And then your North Carolina state legislature is just sitting around like, what do you mean that you just did that? Do we got to go with it? Are we going to say that the state is wrong?
They're out there. They're out there beating their chests about some anti-masking thing they did last week for parental choice. And now this week, this story is going to drop that North Carolina is the worst state in the union for parental choice. Period.
Well, yeah.
It's infuriating.
Again, no issue with the transgender community, nothing on them, nothing with the LGBTQ plus community. No, this is not about them. This is about parental consent. This is about the safety of the child. This is about if a district has a dangerous psychotherapist that they're sending your children to and you don't have the name or know the practice that they're on.
Correct.
Here's the issue that I have. How are you gonna fix that? I mean, there's bad people who practice medicine. I mean, the state selecting that person. I mean, it's just.
Justice, I'm going to have you on next week because we're getting ahead of that. I'm breaking a story next week. Same thing is that the government is sending in government shrinks, and they've expanded Medicaid through the schools for one of only 7 states, and none of your lawmakers told you. And guess what? One party did it, and I know you know the party that did it, and that's the one that always says we will never expand Medicaid in this state. Yes.
Wow.
I am pissed. So we are going to talk about that, and I'm breaking that with you and I'm putting Nancy. It's me and you and Nancy, who's a doctor.
Okay.
And she's going to add, you're balanced, and she's going to add a little bit more counterbalance, but I'm pissed. So we're all three of us going to have, I think it's going to be like Thursday night, okay? Because we're going to break this story, and what you're talking about is what we're going to break. So for now, we've run over, but thank you guys all. I mean, I've learned so much tonight. So thank you for breaking this down, how it works, and just nicely doing those slides and making sure that every detail was put in there, which was very appreciated. So, all right, guys. Have a great night.
No, and then always happy to do it.
And we have another date for this week with the
yeah, we'll have to talk about that, but yeah, we'll have another date this week to talk about what's going on with the next stuff. But we can talk about that off air and trying to figure out that schedule.
I know, crazy schedules. All right, have a good night, guys.